It is 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. I'm Niall Paterson. Coming up on the programme, Christmas travel misery for tens of thousands of people, thanks to Storm Pia and an industrial dispute in France. Huge disruption at the Channel Tunnel, with trains cancelled thanks to an unexpected strike by French workers. And widespread delays on trains in and out of London Euston after damage to overhead cables brought trains to a standstill for hours earlier today. We'll be getting the latest picture from around the country, and we'll be live at Euston and St Pancras. Also ahead, we'll be discussing the murder of Brianna Jai as a judge rules that the teenagers who killed her can be named when they're sentenced next year. While the government's efforts to clear the asylum backlog have created a new homelessness crisis, we've got a special report from our People in Politics correspondent, Nick Martin. And I'll be speaking to a cardiologist about Luton Town captain Tom Lockyer and the heart implant that could allow him to continue his career. All that to come, and much, much more on the UK Tonight. Evening all. We begin the hour with the breaking news from the Czech Republic, where at least 14 people have been killed in a shooting at a university in Prague. The gunman, who was found dead at the scene, was a student at the university. It's been reported that his father was found dead earlier today. Well, just in the past hour, the Czech Interior Minister and the Prague police chief gave an update, saying the number of people killed could have been much, much higher if it hadn't been for the quick response of the police.
We are not aware of any link to the victims, any link to the site, and I believe, right now I believe, victims were randomly selected by someone with no criminal record. Police who were first on site were really brave, entered the building immediately and forced the perpetrator to hold a certain position and made sure that potential victims are evacuated. It was very professional. They arrived within minutes. The SWAT unit was there within 12 minutes. All of the services were there.
As you can see, our correspondent Tom Cheshire is with me. Tom, good to see you. Look, as always, on occasions such as this, details start off scant. They require confirmation. What do we know? What do we know as of 8 o'clock this evening?
Yeah, we've had that throughout the day. The police have been updating, and that's not speculation. This is what the police have told us. They got their first reports at 2:59 local time, so they're an hour ahead over there, and they said they're on the scene within minutes at the university where this gunman was. Now, we learned pretty quickly that he was working alone, that there was no link with international terrorism. The police talked about personal problems, although we haven't had any more detail from the police about that, a 24-year-old. But actually, the day starts a bit earlier. So what happened at 12:45, before this shooting, a body was discovered in a town around 20 kilometres away from Prague. That was the gunman's father, who was found dead. At that point, police said they suspected the perpetrator would be going to the university where he was due to attend a lecture. Right. As a result, that lecture building was evacuated, but around 3 p.m. In a different building, the student opened fire. At 3:20, he was found dead. Again, we don't know the details of that death, but by that time, 14 people had already been killed, 24 injured, 10 of them, the police say, seriously injured, so that death toll could rise. Even when he was dead, they were still looking for explosives. They haven't found any explosives. They said he had a large amount of ammunition. They said all the guns he had were legal, and they said there was no link between the perpetrator and the victims. They believe the victims were randomly selected, and they said, as you're hearing that, the number could have been higher were it not for the response time there. So that's where we are today. There's some more reports, especially in the Czech media, going around, but this is what the police have told us so far.
And what have we been hearing from, obviously, I mean, at this time of year, you know, well, this is a horrific thing to happen at any time of year, but particularly at times like this, you do tend to see kind of senior figures coming out and talking. We have heard from I think it was the Czech Prime Minister as well.
Yeah, so throughout the day we've had those news conferences with the Interior Minister. We've also heard from the President, but the Prime Minister was earlier there, and this was the message he had for the Czech people.
Be assured that the security forces have the situation fully under control and there is no further danger for the citizens of the Czech Republic. Nevertheless, I would like to ask everybody for their understanding and cooperation with the police and the rescue services and for respecting their instructions. I would also like to thank all of those who have been involved in containing this difficult situation. We are doing everything necessary in order to provide assistance to those injured, to their families, and the families of the victims.
So Tom, we continue to see an active investigation. It feels as if the danger may well have passed for those who are in Prague this evening. But again, people will now immediately be questioning the motive for something like this. And there have been suggestions through the day that there were social media posts on Telegram. We haven't heard that from the police, though, interestingly.
We haven't heard that specifically from police. We have heard it from Czech media that there were posts on Telegram, a sort of manifesto where they talked about the motivations. That hasn't been confirmed beyond those personal problems by the police. What they did confirm, there were some speculations inspired by similar shootings in different countries. Actually, there's a reference to a specific shooting which happened in Russia, was carried out by actually a Czech citizen only a few days before. That was referenced in that Telegram post, and that was something that the police did mention. So perhaps there is a link there, and that also that might be indeed the account and their account of it. But that is still happening. There's a lot of work still happening. They're working to identify the victims as well. That hasn't been concluded yet, and that's obviously going to be very hard for the families. And also, I mean, that message you heard from the Prime Minister was very much about reassurance, because just to paint a picture, this is right in the centre of Prague, where, you know, you've got Christmas trees, lots of tourists coming there, so that emphasis on this not being an ongoing incident, not being related to international terror, not being sort of those victims being known, I think is meant to reassure the public who might be there, both Czech citizens but those visiting at Christmas time.
Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. Now, there has been Christmas travel misery for tens of thousands of people today. West Coast train services from London to Scotland were cancelled due to damaged overhead wires, with Euston Station forced to close this afternoon. Delays, well, they are certainly continuing into the evening. Meanwhile, cross-channel trains, both Eurostar and Eurotunnel car services, were suspended due to an unexpected strike by rail workers in France. That strike has now ended, but the disruption again continuing into tomorrow. And as always, at this time of the year, the roads are extremely busy. The RAC says 13.5 million car journeys will take place between now and Christmas Eve. That's up 20% on last year. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports.
The dramatic moment the power went out in Barnsley. Storm Pia causing cuts for tens of thousands of homes, mostly in Yorkshire.
Please take 3 steps back. This is for your safety.
It was a nightmare for those hoping to travel by train. Delays and cancellations as large swathes of the UK dealt with a Met Office yellow warning. And imagine this. A roller coaster rough ride during an Aer Lingus landing at Birmingham Airport. Inside departures, like here at Leeds Bradford, delays caused headaches. British Airways cancelling dozens of flights across the country. Tricky too on the roads, where trees came down blocking roads, and the ferocity of the conditions ripped roofs from homes. In the remotest of communities, like here in Shetland, schools were forced to close. It was a day the whole of Scotland was battered by winds of up to 80 miles an hour, forcing the cancellation of ferry services to Scotland's island communities here on the west coast. A gust of wind of 115 miles an hour was recorded on the Cairngorm summit. As the festive getaway edges closer, fresh weather warnings have been issued.
Well, most places we're not expecting the weather to cause too many issues as lots of people head out on the roads. The main exception to that will be across northern Scotland, where some wet weather is likely to cause a few issues with heavy rain and also, for a time, some heavy snow. But for most places with the busy getaway, the weather doesn't look too serious. It'll be quite blustery and there will be some showers around, but generally pretty decent conditions for travelling around.
Many will be hoping it stays that way. Conor Gillis, Sky News.
Well, let's head live to two of the London train stations worst affected today. Amelia Harper is at Euston. But first, let's go to Becky Johnson at St Pancras. And Becky, I suppose at least we can say there is a bit of good news around this evening, in the sense that that strike, that unanticipated strike, has now been called off.
There is indeed, yeah. If it wasn't the weather thwarting journeys, it was this unexpected strike action taken by Eurotunnel workers in France. It meant all cross-channel trains were unexpectedly cancelled, people turning up here to find out no trains running, also queues of lorries lining the M20 as all those trains were halted. But tonight we hear that the strike has now been called off. Train services will gradually resume in the coming hours, although no Eurostar services out of St Pancras here until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Now, we've been speaking to passengers, of course, desperate to either get home for Christmas or get wherever they need to be. Some saying that if their train cancelled today, the next available one they've been able to book is Saturday. This is going to have a huge knock-on effect for thousands of people as we approach those crucial days where people get where they need to be for Christmas. I can tell you, in the train station there, some carol singers have been doing their very best, but a distinct lack of festive cheer among the passengers.
I'll bet there was. Well, let's find out how things are looking at Euston. Amelia, just bring us up to date, because, of course, whenever you have transport chaos on the scale that we have seen today, it is inevitable that it runs into the following days. Train crews end up in parts of the country that they simply weren't intended to be.
Well, absolutely. This is something that no festive person would want to have seen on their Christmas getaway. Hundreds of travellers were stranded here outside Euston Station earlier, waiting for news about their trains. And it got so bad at one point that station staff here had to close the doors behind me to prevent overcrowding inside the station. So people were left out here on their mobile phones asking each other what to do about the trains, as no one here had any idea at all. The situation at the moment is that trains are still severely disrupted, but some services are starting to get back to normal, although in a limited capacity for operational reasons. And this was all due to overhead cabling problems just north of Watford. Journeys between Milton Keynes and London Euston here were severely disrupted, but it also affected trains that were supposed to head all the way up to Scotland. Engineers were on the tracks earlier. They have re-electrified this line, so things still severely disrupted, but starting to get back to normal. And it's not just been here. A 10-minute walk away, we've got King's Cross. Trains again severely disrupted due to the wind. On the East Coast main line, a tree had been blown onto the tracks. Station staff were able to go on to remove the tree earlier today. But of course, as you say, trains are all in the wrong places and the knock-on effects of that will continue. So look, this is not the festive getaway that people will have wanted, but things slowly starting to resume as normal.
Amelia, Becky, thank you both. Now, a murder investigation is underway in East London after a 4-year-old boy was killed in a knife attack. Police were called to an address last night following concerns about the welfare of a child. A 41-year-old woman who was known to the boy was then arrested and remains in custody. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has more from the scene in Hackney.
It was just before 11 o'clock. Police got a call from somebody who was concerned, they say, about the welfare of a child in the top flat of the building here. They found the 4-year-old boy. He was still alive, suffering knife wounds, taken to hospital and treated for some time at hospital, but sadly eventually died. The woman is 41. She was arrested at the scene, police being very careful not to give any hint of her identification. All they will say is that she was known to the boy. She's currently in custody, being questioned on suspicion of murder. A Detective Chief Superintendent James Conway from Scotland Yard has talked about this as an extremely distressing incident, caused shock and disbelief among the local community, and police murder squad detectives are trying to establish exactly what happened.
Martin Brunt there. Meanwhile, police in Leeds have arrested a woman on suspicion of murder after the death of a 5-month-old girl. West Yorkshire police say they were called to an address near Woodhouse Moor after reports of a baby in a serious condition. She was taken to hospital for emergency treatment, but pronounced dead a short time later. The woman arrested remains in custody. Next tonight, claims that the government's efforts to clear the asylum backlog have created a new homelessness crisis. More than 1 million people are waiting for social housing across the UK. It means that those granted refugee status have nowhere to go, and many of them are sleeping rough in communities where they are not welcome. Our People in Politics correspondent Nick Martin has spoken to refugees living in the streets of Liverpool. He brings us this special report.
How long have you been here, Hassan?
Maybe a week.
Hassan came to the UK on a small boat across the English Channel. Now he's homeless on the edge of a Liverpool housing estate.
Let's get the new one up.
His tent leaks, so a refugee charity has brought him a new one. But local residents aren't happy that he's here.
What happened? Maybe some monty sounds yet.
No.
You've got all the neighbours all worried.
What's your problem with this?
Imagine that was your house and your kids are playing and you've got him tent camping out here. You better get moved tonight.
It is a clear example of the tensions that exist. The government says Britain's asylum system is broken. The taxpayer is spending £6 million a day putting asylum seekers in hotels. So the government's response has been to quickly process older applications to save money.
The initial asylum backlog is down from 92,000 to less than 20,000. We've returned over 22,000 illegal migrants.
But clearing that backlog has had significant knock-on effects. It's piled even more pressure on a broken housing system. We're inside an asylum charity in Liverpool, and the vast majority here have problems with housing.
It's very hard, because cold.
Al-Fadal has lived here for 4 years already. His wife Selma has just been allowed to join him from war-torn Sudan. They're now caught up in the housing crisis, told they're not a priority for a council house, and they aren't alone.
I feel very sorry for them, and this case summarizes the system now. He's just an example of how many cases I've dealt with.
The Red Cross say the backlog clearing has added to an already huge problem and warn that 50,000 refugees could be made homeless by the end of this year.
The government have been very keen to clear backlogs. What's been the effect of that?
Well, it's several effects, really. One is to increase homelessness. People are coming through the system so quickly now, with leave to remain. They're recognised as refugees, but there's no accommodation for them. So they might have solved one problem, but they've created another one.
Liverpool City Council says it's dealing with an unprecedented homelessness problem. Clearing the asylum backlog has, they say, put them under enormous pressure. A government spokesman told us, "We have always met our legal obligations by providing support and accommodation for asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute. As the legacy backlog reduces, we continue to work with local authorities to manage the impact of asylum decisions." But Al-Fadal and his wife Selma are now sleeping on the streets. Their successful asylum claim gave them a chance at a new life. But this is their reality for now. Nick Martin, Sky News, Liverpool.
Pleased to say Nick joins us now. I mean, Nick, this is a fascinating story for me, and a horrible one as well, when you think about the time of year that it is, and the fact that some of those who are involved in your reporting, have been granted asylum in this country.
Yeah, what we witnessed, Neil, in Liverpool, doesn't it? It just brings it into very sharp focus. This was a man who was camping effectively in a housing estate. Residents, perhaps understandably, weren't happy. But this all really goes back to last year, the Prime Minister's pledge to clear that big backlog of asylum cases. And remember, everyone on that backlog, by law, had to be housed in hostels and hotels, allegedly at £6 million a day. And that's why we've been seeing talk of moving them into old airfield bases and barges and things like that. Now, the Prime Minister promised that by the end of this year, that backlog would be cleared. He's got 11 more days. He was asked about this earlier.
Not going to happen.
Well, he was asked about this earlier in the week, and he refused to put a limit on it to say whether they were going to meet it, perhaps understandably. But the pace of clearing the backlog has caused havoc in local authority areas, not just Liverpool. The numbers turning up into areas which are already suffering from huge housing problems. And I suppose it goes to the bigger picture of just how big an issue immigration is now becoming ahead of the general election.
Well, on that topic, we, of course, on a very busy news day, and I'm not going to be as cynical as I might at a different time of year, we've been hearing from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and this is all to do with the five-point plan, bringing down migration numbers, and those who are coming to work in this country, and whether or not they can bring their wife or husband with them.
That's right. Tonight, at about 7 o'clock, the Home Office announced a tweak to James Cleverly's own five-point plan, and that was to bring net migration down by £300,000 a year. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of James Cleverly's plan was what's called a change to the minimum income requirements. If you are a British person and you want to bring an overseas partner into the country, in the past you had to earn over, I think it was £18,600 a year. A couple of weeks ago, they pretty much doubled that to £38,700.
Puts you easily in the top 10% of earners.
Yeah, and it was seen as, you know, it was seen as being unfair, being based on someone's income. Tonight, that threshold has pretty quietly been reduced to £29,000 a year. It is being seen as a bit of a rollback. It is being seen as a bit of a U-turn. Labour Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has accused the government of being in chaos over immigration. But I'll tell you what it also goes to. It also goes to the Prime Minister's claim that his government would be defined by long-term planning. And this idea is only a few weeks old. It's hardly very long-term planning. So, as I say, it goes back to the big issue of immigration. They know that by pulling levers, there's going to have different effects. They're pulling levers and then pushing them back again as quickly as they've done it. Immigration at the election is going to be huge, and the government, I think, are very scared that it's going to play very badly for them.
I can see that as well. Nick, many thanks indeed. Still to come on the UK tonight. Protests at the school closing early for Christmas after teachers were accused of bullying a boy because he's Palestinian. Why the Israeli embassy in London is unhappy with the UK's Eurovision entry, Ollie Alexander. And the latest figures which suggest a steep rise in the number of people catching COVID. Welcome back to the UK tonight. Here's what's coming up in the remainder of the hour. Luton Town's captain is back home after his cardiac arrest on the pitch. We'll be hearing about the implant Tom Lockyer's had, that could hopefully save his career. Fingers crossed. Also, protests have been taking place outside a school that found itself at the centre of bullying accusations made on social media. Let's take just a quick look at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. The Israeli embassy in London has criticised the UK's Eurovision entry, Ollie Alexander. It comes after it emerged the singer and actor had signed a letter saying a genocide was taking place in Gaza and calling Israel an apartheid state. The embassy accused Alexander of learning his knowledge, learning his knowledge of the Middle East on TikTok. The latest data on COVID-19 suggests around 1 in 24 people in England or Scotland are likely to have had the virus last week. Certainly a steep rise from the beginning of the month when 1 in 50 people were thought to have had COVID. These figures from the UK Health Security Agency and Office for National Statistics showed the highest regional rates were in London and the South East. A prison officer accused of having an intimate relationship with an inmate has been found not guilty of misconduct in a public office. Ruth Schmilo, who was a prison officer at HMP Park in Bridgend, denied the charge against her. During the trial, she said what the prosecution described as phone sex with an inmate was in fact sexual harassment. Luton Town captain Tom Lockyer has been released from hospital after he suffered a cardiac arrest on the pitch at the weekend. The club says he's been fitted with an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD, the same device given to Denmark midfielder Christian Eriksen following his collapse at the Euros in 2021. We're joined now by cardiologist Dr. Michael Papadakis. Doctor, great to have you with us. And look, would you mind if we start with what may well sound like a silly question, but I think it's probably useful to have clarification. What exactly is a cardiac arrest?
So essentially what happens is the heart works with electricity. So we've got the electrical impulse that will travel through your heart muscle and will get your heart to pump the blood around your body. Now, that's usually a very regular sequence of impulses, and during a cardiac arrest, for some reason, and usually it's an underlying heart disease that may not have been detected, the electrical impulse is coming together and the heart gets completely desynchronized. So it loses the ability to pump the blood around your body, and that essentially causes the cardiac arrest.
And we saw the collapse happening on the pitch. And I suppose the first thing that we should probably say is that Tom Lockyer would most likely not be here had it not been for the quick actions of the medical professionals around the pitch at the point of the cardiac arrest.
You're absolutely right, and that's the absolute truth. So when we've got a cardiac arrest, the key really is how quickly are we going to start that basic life support, that basic CPR that we've been teaching individuals through school age, and then that buys us time in order to try and get the defibrillator there and deliver that shock, which in a way jump-starts the heart back to its regular heart rhythm. We know that essentially we've got 3 to 5 minutes to deliver that shock if that individual is to survive and have also a meaningful survival with no significant disability.
Presuming by that you mean brain damage and so on because of the lack of blood going around. So tell me then about the ICD. I won't use the full name just again because I think my pronunciation was all over the shop. But it strikes me that it sounds... Is it a pacemaker was the word we would use before?
Yes, exactly. So an ICD is a bit bigger, more sophisticated device than a pacemaker. What it does is it monitors that underlying electrical rhythm of your heart. And if it detects that your heart has gone to a potentially dangerous rhythm that can result into cardiac arrest and sudden cardiac death, it will do the shock for you, so you don't need to rely on other individuals getting there.
So is that almost anticipating the heart stopping, or does it kick in once the heart has remained motionless for a period?
So what it does, it looks at the electrical impulses of the heart. Sometimes if the heart is going too fast, it can intervene and get you out of it without a proper shock. But if that doesn't succeed, then it will deliver a shock for the heart to restart it, essentially.
As you well know, anecdote isn't evidence, but it certainly feels to me that we have seen more incidents of this type over the past few years. Seemingly perfectly fit, healthy young men collapsing and coming very, very close to death. Why does something like this actually happen in the first place? To someone who is a professional athlete, let's not forget.
Exactly, and that's the paradox of exercise. You've got someone who's very fit, supposed to epitomize health in our eyes, and suddenly they collapse to the football field. And usually that's because there is an underlying heart condition. Sometimes the people are born with it. It can be inherited from their parents, or it can happen during their conception. But some other times it can be things like a viral illness, for example, that causes a bit of scar within your heart muscle, and that can predispose you to irregular heart rhythms that can result to sudden cardiac arrest. And that's why part of that prevention is one, that athletes who have symptoms or a family history, they need to report it to their doctors. And the other part is screening asymptomatic individuals to try and identify those conditions before they result to a cardiac arrest.
Well, I'm sure, Dr. Papadakis, that you'll join me in wishing Tom Lockyer a very full and speedy recovery. But let me thank you for your expertise and wish you a very Merry Christmas when it comes.
Thank you very much for having me.
Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll be hearing from a forensic psychiatrist on the killing of Brianna Ghey after a judge ruled that her murderers should be named. That's next. Welcome back. Let's take you back to the breaking news from Prague today, where at least 14 people have been killed in a shooting at a university. The gunman, who was found dead near the scene, was a student at the university. Our correspondent Tom Cheshire has been following the story. Tom, I suppose a kind of a rough chronology of what has been taking place in Prague today would be handy, given that this is a very, very dark day for those in Czech Republic and elsewhere. Yeah, very dark, Dave, and a terrifying day if you look at the footage of students cowering on balconies to get away from the shooter, barricading doors. It started, according to police, at 2:59 p.m. when they got the first call, and they responded very quickly. Within 12 minutes, the SWAT team was, we're hearing from the police. But actually, the chronology goes a bit beyond that. So at 12:45, a body was discovered in a town west of Prague. That body
was the gunman's father, who was found dead. And they believed he was on his way into the university, so they evacuated a building. It was a different building around 3 o'clock where he started firing and managing to kill, as you say, 14 people within a relatively short space of time. But very, very scary, seeing people running through the streets. It's a really busy part of town. Police quick to say that he was acting alone. They had no connection to international terrorism, saying he had personal problems. They didn't go further than that, although there has been more speculation in the Czech media about motivations, inspirations from abroad is something the police did say. They have been updating us through today. It's probably worth having a look at the latest conference where they give us more details.
We are not aware of any link to the victims, any link to the site, and I believe, right now I believe, victims were randomly selected by someone with no criminal record. Police who were first on site were really brave, entered the building immediately and forced the perpetrator to hold a certain position and made sure that potential victims are evacuated. It was very professional. They arrived within minutes. The SWAT unit was there within 12 minutes. All of the services were there.
And we are expecting to be hearing from the Czech President, Petr Pavel, very, very shortly, Tom. But I suppose, as is confirmed by the officials that we were just listening to there, had Czech police and Czech emergency services not been on the scene as quickly as they were, this could have been a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about large amounts of ammunition, according to the police. They were looking for explosives. They were searching them. So far, they haven't found any. We've got different reports in Czech media about weapons used. Local media reporting they used what looked like a large sniper rifle in one instance, but again, waiting on confirmation of that. So yes, it could have been worse, but I do think there was going to be the question, if his father's body was discovered earlier in the day and they knew that he was on his way to university, they knew enough to evacuate it. This loss of life was still happening. They did make the point they didn't know the shooter. These guns were legal. He didn't have a criminal record either, so they can have known about it. But I suspect that will be some of the questions, along with if these guns were legally obtained, if you had permits for them, whether those laws are tight enough. You know, this is probably the worst shooting in Czech history. There are previous shootings in 2019, 2015, but not nearly as many people as this. So it is a really, really sad day. And I think that's what, you know, we heard earlier from the Prime Minister, this call for unity, sympathy, support to share the grief of the families. But it won't be long as well before some of these questions are being asked.
Yeah, you can't help but feel for the families of those caught up in all of this. Tom, for now, thanks very much. A judge has ruled that the two teenagers who murdered Brian at Jai can be named when they're sentenced in February. The pair, known throughout the trial as Girl X and Boy Y, both face a mandatory life sentence. The judge in the trial has asked to see reports on them both before she decides on the minimum amount of time they must serve in prison. For more in this case, I'm joined by forensic psychiatrist Dr. Shoham Das. Dr. Das, many thanks for being with us. And I suppose that we are learning more about the two individuals involved in this as the case has proceeded, and we cannot speak specifically to them, but can we generalise, because so many people will be asking the question, how children, I know they were teenagers of course, but how children can commit acts that from the outside at least look entirely like pure evil.
Sure. Yeah. So I suppose my answer to that is when you look at any form of violence, it's the old debate of nature versus nurture, right? So in terms of nature, perpetrators tend to have specific personality traits like anger management issues, impulse control, a natural lack of empathy. And then you have the external factors, that's the nurture. Often perpetrators have been exposed to violence, witnessing domestic violence, for example, or being the victims of violence, exposure to violence on the internet. They often have some sort of trauma or stress, and they don't have a healthy outlet. So it's usually a combination of all of those things. I do think for this particular case with girl X and boy Y, we do know that there's a lot of egging each other on through these violent messages. So it feels almost to me like there was a game of chicken, and neither one of them wanted to back away. So they were kind of escalating their level of violence and depravity.
From the communications between the two that you will have seen, Doctor, would those constitute red flags for an offence of this seriousness, of this magnitude?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question they were telegraphing exactly what their intent were, and it wasn't, something that was said in whimsy as a joke. It was a series of very direct messages. So absolutely, they were a red flag. But the problem is, how do you catch those messages? The red flags existing isn't the issue. Is how you actually detect them in people, in children like this who keep things from the rest of society, from their parents.
That, I suppose, has to be the question. How do we pick up on those signals? An awful lot of reliance placed on their peer group, one presumes, an awful lot of reliance placed on teachers, but also, you mentioned it yourself, the parents themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose my answer would be that you have to have an open relationship with children. You have to be able to create a safe space where if children feel that they can talk, that you listen to them empathetically without being too accusatory, without being too judgmental. And if they do have these kind of dark, depraved feelings, you have to know how to prevent them. So if they're relatively mild, you could try and figure out some more healthy coping strategies, like exercise, like sports, like talking to each other. And if it gets to a threshold where you think there's actually a risk of danger, then that's when you need professional help. That's when you need therapists, child psychiatrists, etc.
So Doctor, it is not necessarily then an inevitability that someone who has thoughts of this nature, who has a predilection for this sort of violence, would necessarily act upon it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'd go further than that. I would say it's only a very, very small minority. Some people, especially teenagers, they might just be doing it to rebel. They might be looking at dark, depraved material on the internet, whether it's violence, whether it's pornography, just to show off to each other and to share to each other. Only a very, very small proportion will actually act upon it.
What of the judge's decision? I understand this takes you slightly further away from your brief, from your area of expertise, but the judge's decision that these two will be named at the point of sentencing, is there any deterrent factor in that? Does the naming of them make the potential for rehabilitation? And let's be honest, we're a country mile away from that point, of course, but does that make rehabilitation more difficult in circumstances such as this?
I think it does. I think it depends what angle you want to take. If you're looking purely at retribution, then it makes sense that you release their names. There are inherent risks with that, like retaliation to the perpetrators. Even their families could be kind of sought by vigilante groups. If you're looking at purely from a rehabilitation lens, then there isn't really any advantage of releasing their names. I don't think it would hinder their immediate rehabilitation in the months and years to come in prison, but it means it makes it harder for them to re-establish them in society after they've been released. Although I understand that many people will think, well, that's part of the punishment, that's part of the consequence if you do something this heinous and this depraved.
Dr. Shoham Das, many, many thanks for your time. It is a terrible, terrible story, but thank you for your expertise. Appreciate it. Now, an inquest jury has found that an emergency response belt used on a mentally ill man following his arrest may have contributed to his death. Thomas Orchard died of a cardiac arrest and a brain injury 7 days after having the belt placed across his face after his arrest in Exeter in 2012. Our West of England correspondent Dan Whitehead has more.
Yeah, this is a case which dates back to 2012. 32-year-old Thomas Orchard was a church caretaker. He suffered with paranoid schizophrenia, and in October of that year, he was arrested in the centre of Exeter for causing a public disorder. Now, police officers from Devon and Cornwall Police took him to a local police station, and it is there where they applied an American-designed emergency restraint belt. They placed that over his head. It's designed to prevent people from from spitting and biting. He was carried into a cell at the police station in the prone position, wearing that belt, where it was eventually taken off. But it was 12 minutes later that officers checked and found that Thomas was unresponsive. He was lying motionless. They called an ambulance, performed CPR. He was taken to hospital but died of a cardiac arrest a week later. Now, 11 years on, an inquest after 7 weeks here has found that failures by Devon and Cornwall police in their use of that belt may have caused or contributed to his death. It was a jury-led inquest, and they also found that the manner of using that belt when he was carried to the cell and also inside the cell was not necessary or reasonable. Well, tonight the family of Thomas Orchard have given their reaction to the jury's conclusion.
We feel that Thomas was let down by those involved in his arrest and detention, and they missed many opportunities to prevent his death. We have been troubled by the way that the police have sought to defend their reputation rather than taking accountability for their actions.
Well, in 2016, a custody sergeant and 2 detention officers from Devon and Cornwall police were cleared of manslaughter following a trial in Bristol. The police were later fined £230,000 for health and safety breaches relating to the case. Tonight, we've had a statement from the acting chief constable, Jim Colwell, and he said that for the failings, I offer my unreserved apology. He goes on to say that since Thomas's death, the force has implemented a significant amount of learning and improvement, specifically in relation to mental health awareness and training for staff. The result here today in Exeter brings to the end a torturous, in the words of the family, 11 years since Thomas's death.
A primary school in East London had to close today due to what's been described as direct threats against staff on social media. The school says its staff were falsely accused of bullying a boy because he was Palestinian. The claims were made in a video posted on TikTok, prompting large protests at the gates. Emma Birchley reports now from Leighton in East London.
As pupils should have been heading in for lessons, instead this.
Education is a human right.
Protest at the gates of Berkeley Primary in East London. And at the centre of it all, an 8-year-old boy. It started in mid-November when Yahya, whose face we've been asked to hide, turned up with a Palestinian flag sewn onto his sleeve in solidarity with his mother's family in Gaza, many of whom they say have been killed by Israeli bombs.
We received a phone call from the school that he was not allowed, he would not be allowed playtime, and at lunchtime he was isolated from his year group. He was told he was not welcome back at school.
Yahya's parents refused to remove the patch, so he's stayed home for 3 weeks. On Wednesday, the school decided to break up 2 days early.
Imagine an 8-year-old child was constantly bullied,
after videos were posted on TikTok calling for action. Protesters have accused the school of double standards.
When the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, the school had a massive Ukrainian flag outside the school.
He is Palestinian and the badge is his cultural and religious identity.
There's been anger too that a letter was sent to the parents of pupils who've worn Palestinian colours, warning that extremist or divisive comments could lead to referrals to the Prevent team, which is focused on stopping people becoming radicalised or supporting terrorism. In a statement, the school said it had closed early in the light of escalating threats against staff and the school based on factually inaccurate misunderstandings, falsehoods and malicious fabrications, adding that there was no evidence of bullying or misconduct. Yahya's father says his son is being denied an education and that he's been left traumatised and confused. Now the family's calling for an independent investigation and the resignation of the head. At Berkeley Primary, lessons won't resume until January. But with both sides refusing to budge, it seems there's little chance the new year will bring any resolution. Emma Birchley, Sky News, East London.
Coming up next on the UK Tonight, he has done it again. 16-year-old Luke Littler is into the second round of the World Darts Championships, after another stunning night at Alexandra Palace. That's next.
Myself and Nish are here at the Bill Murray Comedy Club in Angel, which is one of our favourite comedy clubs, and they have been amazing helping us do our second year of food drives for the Trussell Trust, but the Hackney Food Bank in particular. And one of the reasons we wanted to do it is it's our local food bank here, but the need has jumped up 66% since last year, and last year was already too high. And as Nish said, it's been a particularly bad year for a lot of people. Exactly, as just in case that's the sign language for
bad.
Pretty bad. And they're currently needing to give out 1 million emergency food parcels this year, and because everyone's so strapped, the donations have gone down, which is very hard on the food banks as well. So we're trying to drive up some donations from around the country. But people are just so generous. So I think people are looking to do something community orientated around this time of year. That's not just all about want, but that's actually connecting with people, and I think that's a big part of it. Well, last year we had a smaller gig here at the Bill Murray, and this year we've moved it to Earth and Hackney because it sold out in about 24 hours. But also one of the big things the Trussell Trust are trying to push is this Guarantee the Essentials plan, which is where we would love if today was all about donating kind of like Christmassy things. Instead, we are needing tinned foods and sanitary products and stuff like that, which is so basic that my heart breaks for anyone who needs to go out and seek those things from food banks. And I think the essentials for most people should be guaranteed by the government. It's awful that people have to go to food banks for things like bread, butter, eggs, and just hygiene products.
Yeah, the Trussell Trust are always very open about how their mission statement is for themselves to no longer exist. Like they don't believe that they should be having to do this, but we're all very relieved that they are doing it because they're stepping into the gap and helping people who need it the most, and we are very proud to be working with them.
I would say if this is something you like the look of, if for say Easter or what other holidays are there? Halloween, Diwali, Ramadan, that there's any centre or community centre around you where you want to put on something, the need to connect and the want to donate is out there. So please do donate to your food banks. They're desperately in need of donations this year in particular. And if you are in need of going to a food bank, oh my God, go and get in touch with the Trussell Trust to look after yourself.
Welcome back. Time now for the sport. David here to take us through it. And I've got a big smile on my face because, frankly, I love the darts. We've got the World Darts Championship taking place at the moment at Ali Pali. Yeah. Yesterday, we were talking about 16-year-old Luke Littler. I think we're going to be talking about him for quite some time.
Do you know what? And what a brilliant story this is. I mean, you know, Fallon Sherrock and the success she had a few years ago. You know, this is on a par with that. It's a 16-year-old kid who's reached the third round of the World Darts Championship, and he's become already the youngest ever winner in this tournament. Born in 2007, got rid of Christian Kiss in the first round, and then in the second round match, beating the 20th seed, Andrew Golding, won it by 3 sets to 1. Despite Golding actually having the better average earlier on, he just nicked the sets. Set 1, set 2, just got himself into a lead, got slightly nervous, then held his nerve when it mattered, and he's through to the third round. This is astonishing. Like, against Christian Kiss, they were singing, you got to go to school in the morning, which actually isn't true, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But next up, Canadian Matt Campbell in the last 32, but that is after Christmas. Before that, how is he going to celebrate? With a true dinner of champions. Have a look at this.
You might have to paraphrase.
I'll paraphrase. Basically, after the win over Christian Kiss, he said that he was going to have a kebab. His manager bought him a kebab, and this time he's going to stay with that winning tradition of that same snack. Let's have a little listen again, see if we can hear it this time around.
Because I don't want to go 2-2 on this stage. I was nervous as it is, but I don't know how I got over the line, but I've done it.
You celebrated with a kebab. What's the plan tonight?
Well, my manager got that kebab, so I'll get my own. I didn't really like it, but it's trending worldwide, that kebab, but I think it's another kebab.
16 years old. Although you see, you know...
Does not quite look that, does he?
No, he doesn't. I looked an awful lot younger at 16, I'm going to say that. But 16 years old, what more do we know about him other than the fact he's magic at the Magic Darts?
Yeah. Well, so born in Runcorn, at school in Warrington, actually picked up darts at 18 months. I mean, magnetic darts.
Thank goodness for that.
Let's be clear about this. But he sat his GCSEs in the summer, but he's opted out of college, hence why he's not got school in the morning. He's had to opt out because he's got his tour card. But he's won the sort of like the youth version of the World Championships at Ali Pali in 2022, 2023. He's won a whole host of titles this year. So this has sort of been coming, this form. And they do think that actually, you know, he could be one of the greatest players, or once in a generation, Wayne Mardle says. So we're going to watch his progress with interest. Has Christmas? Then I'll get back to it. But yes, that's one fantastic story. But a number of others that we are reflecting tonight here on Sky News 2.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I love this country.
Achin, thanks for letting us share your match day experience. You've just landed at Humberside Airport. Tell us about your day so far.
Actually, my day is a little strange because Turkey doesn't use summertime. I have a big advantage in flying to England because I almost land in the time I start the journey. Then for me, the plane is like a bed.
And it's very important for you that you're here to attend the games for Hull City, especially with the team going so well.
Only game I missed this season actually was the game the president's brother's son was getting married, so I had to attend in that marriage. Apart from that, I've been all the games home, and I can see that half of the games away.
So we've got a busy day ahead of us, and I think the next...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Sport done. Time for a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Pia will be gone tomorrow, but it will stay windy for most. Before then, the day's gales will be easing this evening, but still the potential for some travel disruption. The strong winds will bring increasingly wintry showers to the north tonight, with blizzard conditions possible over parts of Shetland and the northern Scottish hills. Elsewhere, cloud and patchy rain will take over central parts, while the southwest will see skies clearing, cold in the north, mild elsewhere. As for tomorrow morning, windy, although not as windy today as today. Gales likely around the northern and western coasts, and 50-mile-an-hour gusts possible to the east of northern hills. Northern Britain will have sunny spells and a scattering of blustery, often wintry showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And that is your lot from the UK tonight for 2023. You can catch up with all the highlights on the webpage. Just scan the QR code on screen. Sarah Jane, you'll be pleased to hear, back on the 8th of January.